get underway right away. And thank you, Cirrus, for sponsoring the coffee break. Great networking experience as usual. We find that all of the participants and all of us have an opportunity to exchange quite a bit, not only on the presentations this afternoon, but of course with the various sponsors and vendors. Well done. We now move forward in our travel cycle with a look at the departure and flight component, more specifically the identification of individuals. This panel is led by David Philp. David is well known by all of us. He is the General Manager of the Identity and Passports Business Unit of the Service Delivery and Operations Branch at the Department of Internal, I was going to say international, that's not bad either, is it, David? You do it all anyway. Of Internal Affairs of New Zealand. Over the past 20 years, David has led the introduction of e-passports, automated issuance processes, and most recently, online passport applications using facial biometric checking as a cornerstone. David leads the ICAO Implementation and Capacity Building Working Group, is an executive board member of the ICAO Public Key Directory Board, and New Zealand's representative on the ICAO Facilitation panel. So, David, the floor is yours to you and your panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and kia ora tātou. Advanced passenger information, and probably more importantly, interactive advanced passenger information, API and IAPI, are really critical in mitigating the risks at the border for countries. And that's because the idea is to make a decision about a traveller's suitability to enter the country, or in fact enable further scrutiny of a person on arrival. You can do this before they actually get on a plane to your country. And for island states like New Zealand, who have been using interactive API for a little over 10 years, I think introduced in 2006. This has given us a great deal of benefit on being able to refuse boarding to a large number of travellers that we deem is unsuitable to enter New Zealand. So today we've got 4 presentations, and they span quite a range. We'll be looking at API, IAPI from a very experienced operator of IAPI in Australia. We'll be looking at the industry perspective through IATA. We'll be looking at a regional perspective, and then finally we'll be looking at some of the challenges that are faced by nations either introducing or operating API. So that's enough for me. I would like to first introduce Joe Franzi. Joe's the first Assistant Secretary for Identity and Biometrics Division in the Department of Immigration and Border Protection for Australia. Joe's a recent arrival in that organisation, but he heads up the Identity and Biometrics Division. Prior to that, he was Assistant Secretary Cybersecurity at the Australian Signals Directorate, which included the leading principal defence contribution to the new Australian Cybersecurity Centre. Joe's got a long history in the defence and military background with over 38 years experience. He's had various positions covering intelligence, analysis, collection training in the cyber fields, and he was the first civilian Director General to support military operations, leading all Australian Signals Directorate support to Australian Defence Force and Coalition Force operations, in particular in Iraq, Afghanistan and East Timor. So not only a very experienced operator in terms of the military background, but also in the organisation which is very experienced at operating IAPI. So over to you, Joe.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, David, for that very generous introduction. It always never ceases to amaze me. Geez, I've been around a lot. I must have started when I was 5 years old to still look this good. It's my first ICAO symposium, and I apologise when I put my slides up if I go through them pretty quickly, because I wasn't due to speak at all, and was a late volunteer last night when Herbert came up and arm wrestled me and I lost. And he said we were starting alphabetically, and I think therefore the delegate from Zambia can be very fortunate that we didn't start from the other end of the alphabet. Anyway, when I look at the theme for this particular presentation and session, there's no doubt that Australia is dealing with increased flow of passengers. We are growing at around 7% each particular year. We do attempt to ensure security by identification of each individual as soon as possible in the border continuum. And interactive advanced passenger information, or APP, Advanced Passenger Processing as we call it in Australia, is key to what we do. So in the now 10 minutes and 27 seconds I've got left, I will share some insights with you from an Australian perspective. Now, I'll just use my biometric to get into my iPad here. Beautiful, it worked. And I'll use the wonderful magic. Beautiful, that's good. So if you look at the journey that Australia's been on, things pretty much started in 1993 with a trial with Qantas, one of our major national carriers. And the key thing about our interactive API is that it is supported by our universal visa system, which I'll talk about in a moment. The real driver, I think, behind Australia's detailed work around interactive API was the flood of arrivals that we expected in the lead up to the 2000 Sydney Olympics, which were a wonderful success. And the anticipated growth in volume of travellers after that particular event. Airlines that incorporated APP into their systems found that they were able to verify electronic travel authorities that were not evidenced with a visa label. And this gave a greater sense of security for airlines that they were less likely to be infringed for carrying unvisaed passengers. And I'll talk about the carrot and stick regime that we have in Australia in a moment. So some key kind of dates. We had legislation in 2001 that made it mandatory for airlines to implement APP if they were flying into Australia. 2003, mandatory for all international flights. Infringement notice regime, i.e. fines for airlines that did not comply, commenced in 2009. And we commenced departure work in 2015. If you look at our traveller environment, you know, Australia's lucky. We're surrounded by water, so there's only two ways to get to Australia, by ship or by air. You can try and swim. Good luck, we have lots of sharks around Australia as well. And last year we had more than 43 million foreign nationals actually cross our border. The department forecasts that by 2020 we expect this to be over 50 million. And obviously everyone's coming to see those kangaroos. that are there in Western Australia there. So people seek to visit Australia for a range of reasons: tourism, work, business, study, taking up permanent residency, or returning to Australia as their permanent place of residence. The universal visa system is actually critical to what we do. All visitors and permanent migrants must apply for a visa or a visa equivalent instrument before they come to Australia. The visa application system is risk-based, regardless of the lodgement channel, be it digital, be it paper. And visa grant details are recorded on departmental systems. And in the last financial year, 8.4 million temporary visas were granted. So basically, to get into Australia, you've got to have a valid visa, or an Australian passport, or a New Zealand passport. So our version of what you call IAPI, APP, is a two-way interface between the airline's departure control system and immigration databases. It verifies that before an individual boards a flight, that a traveller has the authority to come to Australia or depart Australia, and confirms the traveller's visa information and travel document information. There are benefits in this. You can see them there on the screen, but effectively it provides a real-time immigration screen at the check-in counter. It collects pre-arrival passenger information, which we then use with our intelligence capability to assess the risk. Facilitates the use of electronic gates, automatic border control gates, for faster processing. Anyone that has arrived in Australia or departed Australia in recent times, anyone, can I see a show of hands? A few people. Hopefully you've experienced how seamless and quick it was. I can tell because you're smiling. And it better prevents undocumented or unauthorised people from travelling to Australia. So if we take that 43 million travellers that crossed our border last year, only 14 arrived undocumented. So that's a pretty significant capability. Some more benefits there: faster check-in times, more certainty about who's getting granted uplift, certainly reduced airline infringements, because the airlines actually work really hard on this at pre-departure. And airline staff have that discretion to actually uplift passengers or not. And another key force multiplier is our network of airline liaison officers who work with the airline staff at the counters in key international ports to assist them on the information that's gone forward back to Australia, the response that comes back, whether it's a board or no board, document examination, interrogation of intelligence systems, etc., etc. I'll just skip through some of these. I will talk about this. Because we do apply a layered approach in everything we do at the border. For the border in Australia, it's not deemed to be just the physical border, it's a continuum. So it is around what happens when the visa is issued. A lot of work is done there, including intelligence work, at check-in, en route to Australia. You know, we're a long, long way from many of your countries, so we have a lot of time. About the only place we don't have a lot of time to do work is when folks come from New Zealand. But pretty much everyone else, it's a fair number of hours before you'll actually arrive. And then there's the work we do at the border. Ensuring that I stay on time, just to give you a sort of example of what we do here. A recent example, so a passenger in Malaysia fronted up at check-in, provided their passport, they've got an electronic visa, a travel authority. Everything looked okay, but the airline liaison officer just thought there was something a bit suspicious, but didn't have enough evidence to actually work with our Border Operations Centre, our 24/7 capability that actually underpins all this, to say, well, I think this is a no board, and decided that the passenger could board. We had then plenty of time to do further work and check the bona fides of this passenger. The passenger was using a fraudulent identity, so once the passenger arrives at the arrival gates, he is already flagged for some additional love from my Australian Border Force colleagues, who then took him aside, did further work, including some new innovative work with our mobile fingerprint reader, found that he had a false identity, was using a fraudulently obtained document, and he was turned around back to Kuala Lumpur the next flight. So this stuff does work, and the more countries that get on board with this, the more safer and more efficient travel we'll have across the world. 17 seconds to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I think, Australia has obviously got a huge amount of experience and ability to operate the interactive API, and I really couldn't help noticing the 14 undocumented passengers out of 43 million is an incredibly impressive stat in terms, and so it does work. It does put the risk offshore, and I'm sure it will continue to develop. I want to move on now to an industry perspective, and I'd like to introduce to you Celine Canu, who is head of facilitation for the International Air Transport Association in Montreal, IATA. In this role, she's responsible for leading and coordinating IATA strategies and activities on facilitation. She's the secretary of the Passenger Facilitation Working Group, which is a key forum where airlines, airports and government representatives work together in shaping joint policy and positions. She's also a member of the ICAO Annex 17 Working Group, has been an attendee at the ICAO AVSEC and Philp panels, and in her day job is responsible for the development of life cycle transformation concepts relating to passenger identity management, including One ID, which is an IATA initiative, and single token, the development of biometric-based solutions and border control management. She's also a member of the ICAO New Technologies Working Group. She has a history in aviation, and I welcome Celine to give us an industry standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you to all. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will proceed and within the 12 minutes that are now given to me instead of the 15, try to send you the message and deliver the position of the industry as it comes to the use of API and identity management to strengthen security and border control. Just a few words about IATA, as a representative body for airline worldwide, IATA tries to promote the benefits that aviation can bring to national and global economies. We sustain these benefits by developing global commercial standards upon which the air transport industry is built and operates. But we also help airlines to operate safely, securely, and efficiently in an economically environment under clear and defined rules. And it's also the reason why we are here today. So looking at the acceleration of the global economy and how fast air transport as a means to carry goods and passenger is increasing, the big question we have is, are we ready for the challenge and are we ready to accommodate the growth? I won't spend too much time on the figures as you probably saw them a number of times, but indeed, and looking at the forecast, looking at 20-year horizon, according to the scenario, if nothing changes and everything equals, the growth rates will be around 3.5%, which means that the traveling population will double within those 20 years. Other scenarios with different setup and regulatory changes could foresee growth up to 5.6%, which would mean the population would triple within that time frame. So why is it important to have the ICAO trip strategy as a key component of the solution? There are basically several elements that we need to address, and that the use of passenger data and especially API, the Advanced Passenger Information, can help tackling. A key element to strengthen aviation security and facilitation is to ensure that border inspection system provide timely, secure and reliable links between travel document, travelers, and security information held in government databases. Technical experts with experience in the implementation of global interoperable applications and protocol will provide examples of recent initiatives regarding this important element of the ICAO trip strategy. And we can name a few, such as the watch list, the passport readers, border information, the PKD initiative, the use of passenger data, API, PNR. And obviously international database such as the Interpol SLTD. So why do we need a solid and consistent identity management system to support the aviation security and facilitation? Well, for security, there's a need to have consistent information on the passenger if we want to allow the deployment and the development of risk-based security measures. And if we want also to support the UN Resolution 2178, which is also the basis for having a mandatory API program. So to address also the airport capacity constraints, we need automated identity verification to fast-track the passenger process, which also help in decongestioning the airport and remove the bottlenecks. And it's equally important to ensure that we avoid the crowd, specifically in the landside area. Finally, the support of technology to labor-intense tasks bring efficiency. And it helps reducing the risk of human error. It also brings added value to the work that border control agents are performing, and it helps them focusing on behavior and questioning of the passenger instead of going through just administrative work. Whoops. Yeah. So just to repeal the UN Security Council 2178 that was mentioned yesterday, as aviation industry has long focused on preventing the introduction of prohibited items in the security restricted area, as opposed to trying to identify the potential perpetrators, which was in any case a difficult exercise. Now we have a game changer with the implementation and the request for member states to implement API program and get this information. So looking for prohibited item isn't enough anymore. More information is needed about the passenger's identity. And passenger data is one of the tools that can be used to this effect. So while it's important to have the information, it's so crucial to be able to process it and use it and feed it back to the appropriate parties and also the airlines. I mean, we had a great presentation from Joe earlier mentioning that whenever a person is flagged, they have no boarding signal sent to the airline, and so the person does not even arrive or land in Australia. And it's really the type of tool we have to aim at. So a number of, and in terms of capacity, a number of airports are being faced to the challenge of unforeseen passenger growth. The impact on their expansion plans and projection is non-neglectable. And airports are often faced with very complex dilemma. They have this growing population, traveling population, and at the same time they are facing some financial, political, environmental, regulatory constraints, to name a few. So some of the tools to facilitate the passenger process within the airport terminal would include to have a standard passenger data transmission to lift the cumbersome visa requirements, to automate the process, and most certainly to have early processing of passenger data to facilitate it once at the airport. So now I'd like to give you a few highlights about what passenger data is or isn't, about the difference between PNR, and I will then focus on API. More information will be given to you tomorrow during the API workshop, so I invite the one of you who need who want to go deeper in the detail to attend the session tomorrow. So as we refer to passenger data, it includes both API, Advanced Passenger Information, and PNR, the Passenger Name Record. Those two types of information are very different. So the API comprises the biographical information and the flight data. Basically, the biographical information is extracted from the passport. So we are at the border control, they are the user of the passport that you are producing and here. And this information is essentially captured at checking, so late in the process. They are usually considered as verified, specifically when the passport is swiped by an airline agent or is introduced in a self-service kiosk. And the passport information is extracted at this time and processed and verified. The PNR, on the contrary, is the information that the passenger has input when booking its flight, and which is contained in the airline reservation system. So the PNR may be captured up to 1 year before the travel, and they can contain very little or a lot of information. In some cases, it may contain private data which is pertaining to the preference of the passenger, and it is subject to privacy law, and notably in Europe. There are two types of API transmission. One is the legacy batch. So the information is sent in one block, one batch, by the airline to the government, and there's no response back from the government to the airline. So the airline doesn't know whether the traveler has the appropriate travel authorization to enter the country, which might be problematic as the airline will be responsible for repatriating the traveler, which doesn't hold the appropriate information. The other mean is the IAPI or the APP, whereby you have an interaction between the government and the airline, and where you have a response which is fed back by the government. In terms of standard, and as you know, by February 2018, the implementation of API program by member states will become compulsory, mandatory. And so a number of countries are now looking at trying to implement a program. Some key elements that we would like to stress are the respect of the standards, notably in terms of messaging and in terms of data elements that are contained in your request and that you would process. There are a number of documentation, and again today we will explain where you can find them, but there's a toolkit that has been developed by ICAO, IATA and the World Customs Organization that you can easily find typing toolkit passenger data. That really gives you all the background information, regulatory framework and the guidelines, and explain you how you can start implementing an API program. So basically just quick slide, and just to highlight that we have 66 countries so far that have implemented API program and 16 that have implemented IAPI, and there are some difference between the two, and we can come back on it. I will skip the visa. One point also could be to, for countries who are implementing IAPI or ETS, to link it with the IAPI system. It really brings an added value and allow the airline to know that whenever a passenger is allowed on board, it means that he has the appropriate traveling authorization. So I see my time is up, so I will just conclude saying that it's important also whenever you want to implement an API program to reach out to your colleagues within your member states, different agencies, the custom, the police, and the intelligence agency, to the airlines flying in and out of your country, and really think of what you want to do out of this API program. There are a number of support that you can get from ICAO, IATA ourselves. We have regional office. We have in the room the director for Africa, Sidi Gaye, who speaks also French, and we'll be happy to help you together with a number of other international organizations. And my time is up, sorry.
Thank you, Celine. I think it's good to get the other side of the story. One of the things that struck me, API is now becoming a standard and a requirement to actually implement for member states. That I think happens in the next 2 or 3 days, or has it happened already? I'm not sure, but needs to be implemented into the future. If you looked at the map of the world, they're even together 66 states plus 16, and I'm not sure if the 16 are included in the 66, but there are over 190 member states of ICAO. There is a big gap. There is a big gap to actually get everybody using API, and preferably interactive API. I'd like to move on. A regional perspective now, and I'd like to introduce to you Rufus Ferdinand. He is the Deputy Director, Deputy Chief Operations Officer of the Joint Regional Communications Centre, the GRCC, which is a sub-agency of CARICOM, CARICOM being a Caribbean regional organisation. And also, Rufus is part of the, I'm pleased to announce Rufus is part of the implementation and capacity building working group in ICAO as well, and is making a great contribution in that area. But he's really, his day job is really to assist the Chief Operations Officer in the daily operations, administration and management of the JRCC, and oversees a wide range of operational and administrative functions. And he has been in that role since 2010, and with a real focus on crime and making sure that CARICOM addresses the crime and security agenda in this area. So Rufus, welcome to the stage, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, David, and distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to first thank ICAO for allowing me to be a speaker here today and to speak to you on the CARICOM Advanced Passenger Information Program. And the CARICOM APIS program is being managed by the GRCC, as David indicated, is a sub-agency of CARICOM IMPACS and a sister agency of the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center. And the GRCC on a daily basis engage in a series of border security and risk analysis initiatives to secure our region's borders and to make our borders more effective and efficient. And this initiative involves the management of the CARICOM Integrated Border Security System, the CARICOM Visa and Due Diligence Information System, and the CARICOM Integrated Border Management System. The GRCC on a daily basis evaluates core processes, emerging trends, and engaging the relevant partners, agencies, and stakeholders who can assist in realizing its mandate. Above all, we remain committed to a multi-layered approach to include targeting passengers and their movement into and out of CARICOM member states, information and intelligence sharing, and we provide operational support to law enforcement agencies on a daily basis. And the GRCC was established in 2006 by a way of intergovernment agreement to assist CARICOM IMPACS in realizing the crime and security agenda. It's a data center. It receives and collects API data from aviation and maritime carriers coming into and traveling into our space. It's operational, and it's a 24-hour, 7-day operations unit. And it also the house to the Advanced Cargo Information System and also the APIS system. What is the CARICOM APIS? CARICOM APIS is an electronic data interchange system established for the collection, processing, and analyzing of passenger and crew data to facilitate travel and to target high-risk travelers entering our space. Some of the benefits of the CARICOM APIS system, for over the years, and it has assisted in enhancing our border security and ensure the safety of our region, and assisting the screening of the aviation and maritime crew and passenger data, also querying all API data against watchlist databases to include the Interpol, SLTD, and nominal database, also our regional and national databases. It assists member states in the security vetting of visa applicants or persons applying for immigration status in our region. Presently, we have 10 participating member states out of 15 CARICOM countries, and 5 of which recently enacted legislation to participate in the APIS program. And Bahamas, Belize, Haiti, Montserrat, and Suriname, hopefully, by year end, would be fully at least participating in the APIS program. And by extension, we also engage in British overseas territories and other food states that exist in a CARICOM member country, or CARICOM country, to at least to join the APIS program. So in this regard, we can have a greater coverage of all persons moving or traversing the Caribbean region. And the APIS legislation mandated, which was enacted by the 10 CARICOM member states and the 5 additional member states, mandated aviation carriers to submit data to the GRCC and the competent authorities prior to departure. And we, as a result of being the practitioners of that system, we noticed there was some kind of and restriction in terms of what the time frame that was provided to the carriers, whereas we have flights that last probably would, and the flight would be about 20 to 15 minutes from one member state to another. So what we did was that we had to review the provisions containing that API legislation and also work with the airlines, IATA, and other key stakeholders, and to table a revised APIS bill in 2015, where we mandated carriers to submit the data for at least 40 minutes prior to departure. The Legacy bill also had specific exemptions granted to certain classes of carriers, and also the tonnage and size of those carriers. So we also saw that where certain classes of carriers will blatantly exempted from the submission of the data. As a result of that, we indicated at least the loophole that exists in terms of what, seeing the loopholes, and persons of security interest will take advantage of those loopholes. We also at least recommended that the removal of those exemptions, and we require both an inbound and outbound submission for all carriers entering our space. And the CARICOM AP system has somehow, some limitations again. It is semi-automated, and to some extent there is some limited analysis that can be done. It is unscalable and requires multiple databases. And as a result of that, we were able to table and at least sought the assistance of external partners to recommend that we need to move to a more enhanced targeting system, which is modular in nature, rule-based assessment and analysis can be connected, and the generation of specific queries for targeting and assessing risk, scalable in application, and to identify key trends that can enhance our daily operations. And the CARICOM Integrated Border Management System, this slide provides an overview as to how the data is being transmitted to the GRCC and being disseminated to the participating member states. What are some of the benefits of the Integrated Border Management System? It is a shared infrastructure and cost, expert identification of actionable information, faster coordination of information and intelligence, operational efficiency, and technological and space enhancement. This slide gives an indication as to how the data is being collected, transmitted to the GRCC, and being processed on a daily basis. And when a subject of interest is flagged, that information is being disseminated to law enforcement agencies at the destination state. So with various recommendations being provided as to whether that person should be landed, refused entry, or detained. And as indicated, that the data is being scrubbed against several watch list databases, and oftentimes we have seen persons who are traveling on lost and stolen travel documents, or wanted by Interpol, or wanted by various law enforcement agencies for various infractions. That information, at least being in possession of that information before that flight actually reaches the destination state, we would disseminate that information to the border security personnel who would take the relevant action required. The APIS legislation also mandated some data elements and some key fields that has to be collected in relation to the flights. And this slide also provides in terms of what the identification, scheduled departure time and date, arrival date and time, last port of call, the number of passengers. Likewise, data elements in relation to the passenger on board, the name, date of birth, MRTD, the number, the state of organization issuing the MRTD, and the nationality and sex of the traveler. And also the APIS legislation mandated certain timing and then we review the timing as a result of what the loopholes that we saw and the restriction in terms of what our operational activities. And the 2006 model bill covered at least prior to departure, and the revised bill of 2015 covers departure 40 minutes after departure, prior to departure, sorry. And also the frequency of submission of the data to the GRCC, so that that data can be processed, screened, and analyzed. And also the various transmission formats and mode of transmission of that data, as we previously heard from and the previous speaker in terms of what the file format to be used and type of what messaging at least and how it will be transmitted to the GRCC. We also provide a XLS spreadsheet that can also assist the GRCC in collecting the data, and those carriers who are unable to use those, the I-Rings and the CETA and service providers. Well, to facilitate our mandate, we have several MOUs and partnership with several agencies, international and regional agencies, and we, as a result of that, we have seen tremendous benefits in that regard. And on a yearly basis, we process in excess of 250,000 carriers, in excess of 46 million passengers and crew. And for the past 4 years, this slide gives an indication as to the number of lost and stolen travel documents that were intercepted at the ports of entry. Also, the benefits that we provide to law enforcement agencies on a daily basis with regards to the data that is available to us at the center, and also the monitoring, the sanction monitoring, enhanced due diligence checks, the travel history, joint interdiction exercises that we engage with other law enforcement agencies on a daily basis, and also analytical support that we provide to law enforcement agencies. And to support our operations, we have several strategies. We have the current security strategy that was adopted in 2013 by heads of government. We have the CARICOM cybersecurity strategy. We also have a CARICOM counterterrorism strategy, which is before heads for approval. Also, in support of the UN Security Council Resolution 2178, 2309, and 2368. Also, in ensuring that we have the mechanism of the way forward to ensure that the data and the API that they have mandated carriers to submit to our region when travels in our regions can be facilitated and collected then. Operational challenges we have, again, with some of the carriers, the quality of data are being submitted and by the carriers. We also provide testing and troubleshooting with the carriers to enhance that submission and to enhance the data that is being collected. And our goal is to ensure that to have a global APIS network and to be part of a global APIS network so we can have connectivity so that we can track persons, regardless of where they're traveling to, that we have a network that can facilitate the sharing of information and the analysis of that data. And also assisting member states in providing at least and enhancing their borders, collecting data intelligence, risk-based targeting, expansion of the APIS program into food states, and greater collaboration with agencies like ICAO and the PKD database system then. In a nutshell, that is what we do and how we manage the advanced cargo, the advanced passenger information system in CARICOM. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rufus. I think the CARICOM's a really good example of how to approach issues from a regional standpoint, representing, in this case, small nations that have a huge influx of tourists in particular seasons, so huge seasonal variation. I think CARICOM's approach to API is commendable. I'd like to move on now and talk about some, introduce to you Ali Al-athbi, who is working at the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority in the Facilitation Unit. He's been participating in the development of the National Facilitation Program, and from his bio, it looks like he's almost the Mr. Fix-It problem person in Qatar for issues around facilitation, and is responsible for monitoring the progress against meeting ICAO standards. Ali's also represents Qatar's Civil Aviation Authority at the TAG ICAO tag trip. He's also involved in the ICAO MED Aviation Security and Facilitation Plan Development Group, and is the go-to man for facilitation issues in Qatar. So I'd like to welcome Ali to the stage. He's going to give us a bit of an introduction of some of the challenges related to API and IAPI. Ali, over to you.
First of all, excuse me, I'll be delivering my presentation in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bidayatan.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and good afternoon to all of the organisers of this 13th symposium on the ICAO trip programme. This programme wishes to reinforce facilitation at a national level. I represent the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority and am also part of the advisory committee dealing with the API programming in Qatar. So here I'm going to talk about the challenges that we have in implementing the transmitting of information and API in general. So here are the main points that I'll be dealing with. But first of all, I would like to thank the organisers of this symposium for inviting me to participate in this. And this symposium allows us to reinforce the confidence between us, the trust between us, and also I can talk about the 5 elements of API that we have adopted in Qatar and that were also adopted by the 38th session of the ICAO Assembly. The first element of the trip strategy focuses on evidence of identity and links with evidence of identity. The second element relates to MRTDs. This second point refers to the implementation of the concept of these documents, in particular e-passports, in compliance with ICAO specifications. Then thirdly, we have document issuance and control of these documents. Of course, this is carried out by the competent authorities to ensure that there is no fraud. The fourth element of the TRIP strategy deals with inspection systems and tools to check the authenticity of the documents that are submitted through the famous PKD. And then the fifth element relates to interoperable applications for the transmitting of the information. On this fifth element, I would like to say a bit more, namely the exchange of information and data via the Advanced Passenger Information System and the IAPI. Interoperability is founded on 2 UN Security Council resolutions, namely 2178 and 2309, to strengthen border controls and security. In Qatar, however, we have encountered certain challenges in implementing these systems that we would like to share with you so that we can draw some lessons from all of this. Amongst these difficulties, we would like to flag up, for example, the reception of or receiving inexact information and not having enough answers about the authenticity of the data that we've received. That has an impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of the API system, and then as often there's a lack of rapid responses that then slows down the system. And thus, this runs counter to standard 3.48 of Annex 9. This annex recalls that each contracting state that introduces an advanced passenger information API system shall adhere to the standards that have been adopted for the transmission of advanced passenger information. In certain cases, we encounter a different type of difficulty, namely the same data is sent various times, and this creates some disturbances and interference. So Another difficulty is, as I've said, this repetitive sending of the same data. So this causes interference, and this runs counter to 3.48.4, this recommended practice that says that contracting states should seek to minimize the number of times the same API data is transmitted for a specific flight. A third type of difficulty now, breakdown in the system. This also slows down the transmission of the API data. We have to call that, we also have to have a continuous support, and emergency measures have to be taken to deal with any system breakdown. And we find all this in recommended practice 3.48.10, where it says that contracting states and aircraft operators should, on a continuous basis, provide operational and technical support to analyze and respond to any system outage or failure in order to return to standard operations as soon as practical, so that this does not have a negative impact on the API exchanges. And then sometimes there's a delay in the responses coming in. That is another difficulty that we have encountered. This also has a negative impact on the effectiveness and efficiency of the API, and it also has a negative impact on aviation security. If the response is too lengthy, this disturbs aviation security and also the flow of passengers. And it runs counter to recommended practice 3.48.9. which stipulates, I recall, that contracting states using the API systems should ensure that it's capable of 24/7 operation to minimize disruption in the event of a system outage or failure. Another type of difficulty now. Manual data being entered inexactly sometimes. Sometimes the passport cannot be read automatically. There's various technical reasons for this. It might be linked to the document itself, or it may be related to the machine reader. But it does mean that then the data has to be manually entered, and that can cause problems, or it can lead to mistakes creeping in. Because in certain cases, the inputting of data is not in compliance with international standards on this. For example, certain names are entered incorrectly, and this is even more the case when they're very lengthy or complex names. As you can see up on the screen, it's very difficult to enter these in the specific fields within the system, so we have to reduce the number of letters or cut down on the name so that it can be fully entered into the specific field within the system so that it then can be automatically read. However, when we enter these data manual and we try to truncate them, certain errors may creep in. And we can find ourselves faced with a situation where we've got an abbreviated name that is incorrect. To conclude, to avoid these difficulties that we've encountered in using the API system, we would like to recommend that in order to not face these issues, we have to ensure that we implement the standards and recommended practices at an international level, such as the guidance material and all of the recommendations related to air transport facilitation, which have been adopted by ICAO in line with the Chicago Convention, as well as the specifications related to travel documents. And then there's also the guidelines from the WCO, IATA, and ICAO as they relate to the API system. within the framework of implementation, we have to implement the standards and recommended practices as they relate to API into the national legislative and regulatory frameworks that exist. We have to ensure that we train up our human resources appropriately. And we also have to have the necessary equipment and resources provided. There's the questions of sustainability, which is important as well, because that allows us to guarantee that this work continues in a correct manner within the API system. So we have to adopt a quality control system to ensure the sustainability of this, and we need to do the necessary updates of the system as well. Having said all of this, I would like to conclude my presentation here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ali. Your systems are complex and can fail, and I think you're absolutely right. In terms of following all of the guidance material, we've got the best chance of making these things work. But from time to time, they won't work perfectly. But I think all of our speakers this afternoon have highlighted the importance of API in minimising risk for member states and reducing things like transnational crime and terrorism. So I think we've got some time for questions. Have we got? No. We haven't had any questions from an email question, but is there any questions from the floor? No questions from the floor. I'm finding that a bit surprising, given there must be over 100 member states that haven't implemented API, and I just wondered perhaps if we could ask the panel, obviously there's the technical challenges of implementing API, but there may well be also some legislative ones, and I just wondered if one of the panel could give us a wee bit of background on what were some of the